Hey, this is Dr. Eric Fields. So I developed this food dependency checklist, and this checklist is really to help you determine if you do have this unhealthy psychological dependency on food. Um, Now, I will give you the same speech my professor gave me when we were studying the DSM-5, which is this gigantic book that has a listing of hundreds of different psychological disorders. And I remember my professor saying, now, when you start reviewing these different disorders, please do not diagnose yourself with everything. Do not think just because you have a symptom here or there or one of the disorders that you have that disorder, because you essentially will conclude that you have almost every disorder in the book. And this works the exact same way. I don't want you to think because you checked off yes to a couple of these that that means you have some kind of food dependency issue. This is a list of symptoms, and the more you check off, the greater the likelihood that you do have this unhealthy dependency on food. And certainly, the more you check off, um, the higher the degree, most likely. Although not 100%. Because it is possible that you check off maybe 6 or 7, whereas somebody else might check off 12 to 13, and you could possibly have a worse food dependency issue than them because those 6 or 7 that you checked off are so interfering with your life. They're such a main issue for you. So not a perfect one-to-one correspondence, but definitely the more you check off, the more chance that you do have one. And I would say, generally speaking, there's a good chance the more you check off, the higher the degree. Okay, so with that being said, let's go through this. Again, this is a checklist that I created to help people really start to look at their food dependency issues and see if they do actually have one. The first one, do you often eat more food than you intended? Please pay close attention to the certain keywords like often, right? Do we sometimes eat more food than we intended to? Of course. But do you often do this? That's the keyword there. Do you forget sometimes what you ate on a given day? You might be asking yourself, well, what the heck does that have to do with anything? Well, that is basically looking at you doing this kind of mindless eating, eating like an automaton, whereas you don't even really know sometimes what you ate or how much you ate. And that definitely is a symptom of a food dependency issue. Do you have strong urges for food even though you ate not too long ago? So, in other words, if you ate not too long ago, certainly sometimes maybe you didn't have enough food. But if this is happening a lot, then chances are, since you ate not too long ago and you're having these strong urges, it's psychological and not related to biological needs, unless there's some kind of underlying medical condition, of course, that explains that. Do you have cravings for food even when you are not hungry? Kind of similarly looking at that as well. Do you have a tendency to misread signals and believe you are hungry when you really are just thirsty? And this, I always ask people to run this kind of experiment. Whenever you're feeling hungry, sometimes it may be because you're thirsty. And so it's always a good idea before you start, looking for food and, ravaging through your refrigerator to have some kind of drink or beverage and to see if that does a trick. But if it's a pattern, again, these things are symptoms if they're occurring often or they're becoming a pattern that you're frequency misreading these signals. Do you eat mindlessly and thus not pay much attention to what you're eating? Some of these questions you may notice are very similar. They're just worded a little bit differently. But they do look at these aspects from a slightly different vantage point. Do you eat when you are stressed, depressed, lonely, frustrated, or experiencing any other type of negative emotion. And again, try to interpret these to do you often eat for these reasons. And there is really looking at, some kind of function, some psychological function of food for you to get rid of negative feelings or help you deal with them. When you stop eating, do you often feel like it is difficult to stop and finish? This kind of speaks to feeling out of control when we're eating. This is the kind of eating that happens a lot when we're binging. Do you often order more food than you can eat in restaurants? Everybody does this on occasion. Again, if this is happening more times than not, especially a lot more times than not, then that definitely is, kind of alluding towards an issue. And the other thing too is if you don't really go out to restaurants that much, and so once in a while you go like maybe once every several months, and erroneously order too much food during those times, that may just be a lack of experience of going to restaurants or something of that nature, right? So this would be more oriented towards people that eat out, pretty regularly, like at least once a week. Do you often find yourself thinking about food for no particular reason, even when you're not hungry? So this is going to like food obsessions, right? So from time to time, there's nothing wrong with thinking about food or looking forward to a certain meal that you might be having that week, especially if it's a special occasion. But if you're doing that often, that's definitely um, a good possibility it's an issue, especially when you're not hungry. Do you look forward to certain meals for upcoming special occasions or events so much so that you obsess about them days or even weeks in advance? I love Thanksgiving. And so, absolutely, a couple weeks, before Thanksgiving, I'm thinking about it here and there and anticipating the meal. But if you're obsessing about it, where you're like, oh, I can't wait, it's going to be so delicious, it's going to be so awesome. And like every day you're thinking about it and you're focusing on the food so much more so than the other parts of the experience, like the social aspects, and being with family, enjoying the event just for itself. That again can speak to a food dependency issue. You spend more time than is typical looking at restaurant menus online. This is a behavior that people do, again, when they have some kind of food obsession, in the sense that it's occupying way too much mental space. It's occupying way too much space in their heads. Is food occupying too much space in your head? Okay, this is page 2 here. There's only 2 pages, folks. When you begin a meal, do you often feel some rush of excitement to eat? If you are absolutely starving and you just got done with a rigorous exercise routine, there's nothing wrong with really being excited to eat. But if this is just happening a lot, almost, of a chronic nature where, every meal is just so much excitement, such an adrenaline rush, that definitely is saying you're way more dependent on this than you should be. And way more dependent meaning this is not just satisfying biological needs. You often wake up or have difficulty sleeping and go to the refrigerator to find something to eat late at night. You might be wondering, what does that have to do with a food dependency issue? Well, most people, if they wake up or have difficulty sleeping, the first knee-jerk reaction is not to go to the refrigerator. They may do other things to get themselves back to sleep or to occupy their mind until they fall back to sleep. So this is really speaking to that, if that's your go-to, right, to deal with this kind of issue or problem, then that's not a good thing. At social events and functions, do you eat more than usual due to feeling anxious, awkward, out of place, etc.? Again, is this a pattern for you where this is how you deal with social anxiety or discomfort? Is that a function of food to you, for you? And then some of the items I have on here are very point blank. Do you feel out of control with your eating? In terms of your leisure spending for fun, does a good proportion of your money go towards food delivery, eating out, and restaurants? If you were to basically draw a pie graph of your life, your day-to-day life, how big of a chunk of that pie graph would food, you know, take up? And not just the actual act of eating, but the time that it takes to prepare the meals, the time spent obsessing or thinking about food, all of it. Any food, thoughts, behaviors, etc. How big of the pie of your day-to-day activities does that consume, take up? Do you find yourself talking a lot about food? This is something to be aware of. When you're having conversations with friends and family, you might not notice this, but they may, in the sense that you're talking a lot about food. You're talking about what you did and highlighting going out to eat or what meals you had. You're asking them about what meals they had. Again, this is speaking to like some sort of food obsession. Do commercials for food trigger strong cravings that can lead to non-essential eating? Listen, marketers are super smart and they absolutely devise commercials and design them in a way so that they can trigger us to want their products. So certainly, if you see an advertisement for something, it may get you thinking about that. But the degree is what we're focusing on here. Usually a commercial for food, if we're not hungry, will get us thinking about it, but not leading to strong cravings. And again, if you're checking any of these off, don't automatically conclude that you have some major food dependency issue. Do you often feel guilty about your eating behavior or weight? Really focus on guilt. It's a real barometer in terms of whether or not this is problematic for you. Are you a chronic weight gainer, which is basically someone who has cycles of gaining and losing weight, with more periods being weight gain than loss? That would be the result of having a food dependency. You have a lot of difficulty maintaining your weight after you have lost a significant amount. Speaks to weight control issues. Again, a lot of times the culprit is a food dependency issue. You struggle with weight control in general, such that you cannot seem to maintain any one range of weight for very long, similar to the other ones. And finally, do you often avoid certain activities and places because of your weight or eating style? This is feeling shameful about our pattern of eating. We know that it's problematic. We feel badly about it. And because we keep doing it, that's kind of the hallmark of a dependency. When you know the effects, especially the long-term effects, are negative, but you keep doing it anyway, in spite of that, usually speaks to some kind of dependency. This is not an exhaustive list, but this absolutely will really get you to start critically thinking about whether or not you have a food dependency issue, and if so, how much, and then how that is related to your weight loss struggles. This is Dr. Fields. You can reach out to me, send me a direct message, send me an email, and I will send you this food dependency checklist if you'd like. Otherwise, I will speak to you soon.